All right, I think we're ready to get started. Awesome.
Yeah.
You can hear us all right. If you could just pop in the chat and let us know that everything sounds okay. But I'll assume that's the case, and we'll keep going here. So welcome to the Next.js World Conference workshop portion online. This is hosted by myself, Will Bishop, and Mettin Parzinski. And today we're going to be building server components in Next.js. So this is going to be a really great workshop. Hopefully it'll be around 1 hour to 1.5 hours. We'll walk you through kind of the background and all sorts of stuff about this beta capability. But we're going to be working specifically in a Next.js app. And to get us started, let's quickly share a Miro board that we'll be using for today's workshop. So you can follow the link on the board to access this, or you can scan the QR code. And we'll give everyone just a moment to get started with this.
Yeah, you'll need to join so you can copy paste some code instead of typing everything manually. So that's going to save you some time. And we will pop back later to this slide, just if someone missed it.
All right. So assuming everyone has been able to copy this, we'll also just paste this in the chat real quick. So that should be in the chat for this section. And we'll keep going. So now that we have started with this Miro board, and we'll just give a few seconds for people to join. But in the meantime, if you're in the session, why don't you join in the comments and let us know if you have experience with some of these items on the board. So, have you used Miro before? Do you know TypeScript? Have you worked with React server components before? So clearly, Mettin and I have used Miro before. We've also worked with React server components.
Yeah, I've used Miro every now and then.
Yeah, just occasionally.
Occupational hazard, I guess.
Awesome. So you can probably deduce from this board here that we're going to be working with a few different components like TypeScript, Miro, React server components, Next.js, just to name a few. And let's just jump into it. So to move along here, we'll get started with React server components and a little bit of background on exactly what they are and what we'll be building. So today we are going to be building a Next.js app that utilizes some larger bundles like Moment.js, for instance. But instead of bringing all of the power and size of Moment.js to our client side in our bundle, we're going to use server components to optimize. And you'll see here in this example that in the first screenshot, we see our bundle has this size of 182 kilobytes. And the second one, it's exactly the same. So this is for all the different components that we're loading into the client bundle. And the point here that we want to make is that both including Moment.js as a package and then not including it, the bundle size is the same. And that is one of the major benefits of React server components that we're going to demonstrate today. So who are we? Well, we are Will and Mettin, and we're really excited to introduce ourselves really quickly before we jump into the nitty-gritty of the workshop. So real quick, a bit about me. My name is Will. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Miro. Really passionate about web development and APIs in particular, and how they can help us connect apps and do a lot of really cool things. But I'm really excited today to talk about React server components specifically. And I'll hand it over to Mettin as well.
Yeah, so I've been working at Miro since December 21, so just over 1 year. And I'm part of a team called Developer Experience. So my responsibility is to make sure that everyone that wants to create a plugin for Miro and make their data available on Miro has a great experience. And I try to lower the barrier as much as possible. And during this workshop today, of course, it's all about server components, but we'll also be using some of the tools that I'm responsible for with my team. So yeah, let's hope everything goes well. And if something goes wrong, it's not the things that I worked on. So.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Mettin. So with that in mind, I want to quickly just talk through some of the reasons why it's useful to talk about server components, why we're actually demoing them today. So to set the scene with a bit of context, the React team actually introduced an experimental version of server components over a year ago now, and it's actually evolved quite a bit even since they introduced these initially. And they've actually partnered with Next.js to offer a kind of baked-in version that is more easily accessible and an easier developer experience for us to play around with them while they remain in beta. So why is it worth thinking about or learning about React server components? Well, there's a few different reasons, but the first is that you can optimize, like I was saying before. So in that initial example, we showed a common package that everyone uses, like moment.js, and how you don't have to bring all the weight of these powerful kind of components into your client side or your front end. You can actually query them directly server side and really optimize the performance of your app by keeping the bundle much smaller. It's also an easy way to directly access information and data from your server or backend, like I was just saying. React server components can also be fetched multiple times, unlike traditional kind of server-side rendering, where it's like once on page load. And the developer experience as well is a huge benefit here. So especially when we're talking about using like Next.js in conjunction with these React server components, the experience continues to get better and better. And it's a really great way to work with the power of server-side components without actually having to develop it all on your own from scratch. We can use these frameworks like React and Next.js to help us with that. And lastly, before we move on, just want to caveat this workshop to say that these are still in beta, so you should not use these in production. It wouldn't be recommended. Even in the last 6 months, these capabilities have kind of already changed quite a bit. So just something to keep in mind that while we're showing you what you can do and what's possible, really intended for a development environment at this point in time. And lastly, as I was kind of hinting at, Next.js has created this experience where we can use an app directory where all this beta functionality can live, but we don't recommend trying to kind of hack your own server components in another kind of framework or even in Next.js. Really recommend trying to stick to at least these boilerplates that they've all set up for us. All right, so that's a little bit about the background, the benefits, and some limitations. So let's actually get started with getting our hands a little dirty. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install a boilerplate using create Miro app. So if you've never worked with Miro before, we have an npm package or a yarn package in this instance where you can actually create a Miro app from scratch using just a simple command from the terminal. And for this, we're going to copy the yarn create statement here, and we're actually going to go ahead and create our own app. So I'm sharing my screen now, and I'm going to go to my desktop and just start a new project. So first,
don't forget, Will, about copying to the context menu.
Oh, yes. So in order to copy for the portions you're going to need, you'll be able to click here, and you should see a ... and there will be a copy button. If you have any trouble with that, let us know in the chat, and we'll be happy to help with that. I'll also paste this into the chat here as well. So this is the first command that we'll need. So back to my desktop, I'm going to create a new folder for this project. And I'm going to change into this project as well. And then within my new folder here, I'm going to create a new app with yarn create Miro app. Give that a moment to run. All right, so now that we have this, I'm just going to double check that that was successful. And if so, you should see this Miro Next.js directory that was created. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my text editor. And I'm just going to open up this project. Oops. All right. Now back to our steps here. The next step is going to be we're going to want to create a new folder in the root of our project called app. And this is the directory where we'll be primarily working in. And so when you open the Miro Next.js project, new folder right within the root called app. And this is where all the beta functionality in Next.js is going to live for us and allow us to play around in this kind of test environment, so to speak. Once we've done that, we're going to create a new file, and it's going to be called next.config.js. I'm going to copy the code that we'll want to use here and paste this snippet into the chat as well for anyone following along. So this that I just pasted in the chat is going to go in our next.config.js file. So within miro.next.js, I'll do config.js. Oops.
Yeah, this actually tells Next.js that we're using this experimental new features. And again, this is not used for production. So when you see a word experimental, be careful, but this is just for playing around and seeing what's coming up in the future. So don't use this for production.
Exactly. All right. The next step here is going to be to apply a patch. So this boilerplate app we're using has a lot of the functionality that we need, but there are a few tweaks that we need to make to our Miro app, including some authentication things and a few things we won't have time to cover in the workshop itself. But we will apply this patch to get our app ready for the next part of the workshop. So what we're going to do is follow the link to this GitHub repo, or gist rather. And I'm just going to simply download the gist. Once I have this downloaded, I'm going to take the next13-miro.patch file and bring it into my project, also in the main directory there. And then we're going to copy the statement here to apply the patch, which is git apply patch, essentially. Paste this into the chat for all of you as well. So within my project, make sure I'm in the right folder here. Apply next13miro.patch. And if this is successful, you should notice that your package JSON and a couple of other files have been updated. Let's say you can tell that the patch worked correctly. Once we've done that, we're going to run yarn to actually update the packages that our patch has just updated as well. So once you've applied the patch in the command line, just type in yarn. All right, and now the next step here is to add in our credentials that we'll be using for our Miro app. And this is a Miro client ID, a client secret, and a redirect URL. And these are all referenced for the authorization flow that we'll use to access the Miro API.
Don't tell our security team we shared this.
Yeah. So again, you can just copy this directly. If you have any trouble, let us know. And I'm actually just going to pull my VS Code into the same screen here to make it a little easier to see for us. All right. So once you've copied those credentials, go into your .env, and you'll see that there's a placeholder for the client ID and client secret already. You can just take all of that and replace it with what you've copied here from the Miro board. Once you've saved that, we'll be ready for step 2 here, which will be to actually run the project. So once we've got our credentials in, we'll go back to our terminal. We'll do yarn start. And you can see here on success, we'll be able to go to localhost and view our project. So I'm going to leave the Miro board for just 1 second and go to localhost 1000. And here we see a Miro board info viewer. So this is just kind of our very first like boilerplate page here. And you should see a login to Miro button like we do here. And the bottom section we can kind of ignore for right now. Give everyone just a moment to follow along here. So once you're at this page, let's click Login to Miro. And it's going to bring us to an authorization screen. And for the authorization screen, we're actually going to need to log in with these credentials that you see here on the screen. So in this login details screen, you'll want to follow these steps. You should see a sign in with Google option, and you can use the email that we have here, which I'll copy into the chat. And you can use this password as well, which I'll also copy into the chat. And I'm actually going to open a new incognito window, just so this is a clean session for us. So just to reiterate, you'll go to login with Miro, then you'll click sign in with Google. Then you will paste in these credentials. So the email is miroworkshop.jsworld@gmail.com. And the password is JSWorldConf123. Once you've done this, you should see add and allow JSWorldConf app. And you can hit add again. And this is just simply authorizing Miro to be able to make requests on behalf of this account. So I'll hit add again here. And we'll see that it says successfully authorized. Once you get to this screen, you can just hit back home. And we will do a bit more with this later on in the workshop. So you can see here that my homepage says something about all 3 boards that I have. So this account has 3 boards under it. And as I just said, we'll talk a bit more about this when we cover layouts. But for right now, we'll just give everyone a moment to get here and make sure that they can see this screen.
And if there's any trouble, of course, let us know in the chat, and we'll take a moment to help everyone out, make sure everyone is at the same place in the workshop that we are right now.
All right, so up to this point, we've done a few things. Just to quickly go back over it, we have created a boilerplate project using the yarn create Miro app command. And then we have created a new directory within that project called app. And this is part of Next.js's experimental beta functionality. Then we added a configuration file for Next.js. We applied a patch to handle some things that we worked on in the app already for you. We updated our project with some environment variables. to be able to work with the Miro REST API. And we've run the project. And that has brought us to the screen that we have right now with the Miro board info viewer. All right. So if you get lost at any point as we go through here, you can actually use Miro to view the notes section on the upper right-hand corner here, and it'll display an outline of this whole workshop, and you can get a sense of where we're at and what the section is about. So currently we are already through the background. We already went through building the boilerplate application, and we're right here at the check-in section. So just a helpful tool in Miro in case you have any trouble following along. And with that, we will keep going.
Yeah. So what we're going to do now is, in the opening, we mentioned that you can include external libraries and they will be executed on the server. So we'll demo that now, and we'll use moment.js to display this capability. So what you can do is you can pop into your terminal and you do yarn add moment to add moment.js to your package JSON file. And if you then look in the node modules file folder and you look at the moment.min.js, you'll see it's almost 60 KB. And with gzip, that's 18.1 K, which you're sending to your client normally. But if you just, let's say you have an application and you just want to display one date and you want to format that nicely, it would be nice if you don't need to send that data to your client. So with Next.js app tier projects, you don't need to. So what we're going to do is we can open app/page.tsx. And in there, you can now add moment.js, just so you can, again, copy paste from these code snippets that are on the Miro board. And then add a time HTML tag that has the moment.format and then whatever format you like. But we're using the normal Dutch way of formatting dates. And you can then, well, if you didn't do it yet, run your project. So you can do yarn start. And then if you go to your local host, you'll see that the time, the current time is displayed on your page. So if you just refresh now, you'll see there it's the time. And if you refresh again, you'll see that the 44 has changed and will probably be like 52 now. And so you see we have implemented our clock successfully in our application. Very nice, very easy. So yeah, quite successful. The cat is happy.
Exactly. So
yeah. But we're not done yet. So if we do yarn build now in the terminal, we can note the file size. So yarn will now create static pages where possible, run everything to make sure you have a deployable bundle, and you see everything that it created. So it created a few files for us, a few shared files, 404 page. And Will, if you could take a screenshot of the output so that we can compare later. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove everything we've just did. I know it's a bit weird. We just added moment. We have made a beautiful clock, but we're going to remove it again. So what we'll do is do yarn remove moment in our terminal. And then in our /app/page.tsx, remove that time tag and the import for moment.js. And you'll see if you go to your local host that we don't have a clock anymore on the page. The clock is gone. So we're going to run yarn build once again, now without the moment.js. And if you can open that screenshot that you just made, Will. Oh, you already have it there. So you see, it's all exactly the same. Nothing is added to our file size. So we're able to use a wonderful library that unfortunately gets some critique for giving a large footprint. Well, we don't have to care about that anymore. As long as something is a server component, and we'll talk about server component and client component later on, all the dependencies that are loaded in there are also executed on your server. So it's a lot faster when used in production, which you shouldn't do. Don't use it in production, don't forget. So that's super powerful. Yeah, it's super happy about that. And of course, we're talking about one library now, which is gzip 18.1k. But it's, yeah, on an average page, you don't have just one library, right? You'll have 10 or 15 things that you're using, and you don't have to send them to your client anymore. Only things that require interactivity will be sent to your client. So if you, yeah, we'll talk about that later, about what I mean exactly by that.
Awesome.
So yeah, I hope everyone is still with us. I know this is a lot of information. And yeah, I mentioned server and client components before. So maybe you can make this full screen.
Yes.
And then follow me, please, on the board. Then I can show everyone around. So there's server components, and it's quite easy to make something a server component. You just do use server. That should be the first line in your component. Or if it's a client, oh, this is wrong. Oopsie. Client component.tsx. You just have to use the directive use client, and then Next.js will know that you are going to be using some interactivity here. So let's say your component is going to be using an effect or a state, then you should use client. Otherwise, it should just be server component. And actually, this is optional. So if you don't define if it's server or client, then Next.js will always assume that it's server. So it's the default, and you can use it when there's no interactivity in this component. So how does that look in practice? Let's say we're building a news website. Well, you'll have your main app.tsx server component that has maybe a server component for the header and a server component for the menu and a server component for the logo. And the server component can just nest another server component, which nests another server component, which nests another server component. But as soon as you have a component that uses interactivity, so if it's a client component, then everything underneath that will need to be a client component. Because, well, if something's rendered on the client, you can't also run a child on the server. There are some ways to render a server component as a client component, and that's basically, let's say you have a server component.tsx, and I will add an example. So I will just add a code block here and make it a bit bigger so people can actually see. So if you have a code block or a server component that you want to use on the sorry, I'm a bit lost for words. If you have a server component that you want to render on the client, you can just do use client, and then of course this is a bit pseudocode. Whatever you would normally do, just say server component, and now you have a server component as client component. You've just made your client component into a server component. Super easy. There's a lot to this, and this is quite hard to grasp, but if you read the documentation, which is linked on the bottom right here, you will get the hang of it. And it's important to always keep in mind when you're building something with Next 13 app tier, if this is a server component or a client component. And you want to have the best performance, and to do that, it's best to aim for always having as much server components as possible. And yeah, now Will can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Mettin. So as Mettin was just saying, we can use a mix of server and client components. So to demonstrate this, we're going to make our own client component here to create kind of an interactive timer, as opposed to the one that we used initially, where we would reload the page and we would see the new time. We're going to create a component where this timer is actually going to change and update dynamically, which is exactly when we might want to use a client component instead of a server component. So I'm just going to quickly copy this code snippet here, where we've already written out a quick function to essentially create a timer, in essence. And so to actually take this and make it into a component, we're going to follow these steps here. So first, we're going to create a new component. So I'm going to go back to the app here. And within the app directory, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it time difference tsx. I'm going to paste in the code snippet that we just copied. Make sure we hit save. Then I need to import this in our layout.tsx. So back here in our app in layout.tsx, we have a few different components that we're already pulling in. Underneath the authentication, I'm going to pull in this time difference component. And then this part's important. Make sure you're formatting it using this kind of shorthand that we have here for one of our properties and creating a new date. I'm just going to copy and paste this here. And then double check that you have an import statement at the top to import that component. So we've got both of those things now, and we've got our time difference component returned here. So I'm just going to hit save. And now if we go and reload our local host, so I'm going to run yarn start again. Go back to localhost, and we'll see that it says page rendered 3 seconds, 0 minutes, etc. So we have this dynamic, rendering of a client component where we have this kind of interactivity that Mettin was referring to. So this would be a great use case for things like, a timer like we're showing here, but also real life applications like flight prices, which might be, changing every second or minute, or stocks, all sorts of things that need to be dynamic. Maybe it's, some kind of feed or something like that. But we're just showing this here to kind of show you how, the use of client and server components can kind of complement each other depending on the exact use case.
And there's one part of that's a gotcha that you need to keep in mind. The first render of the client component, Next.js will still try to do it on the server. So in the case of this snippet, if you can open the snippet again, on the last line, or in the return value, so line 35, you'll see that we call prettified time difference, and I'm a bit lost where the code is that I wanted to refer to. There's like a backup statement somewhere. Well, the first item it's on server and it doesn't have the date primitive there, so we always fall back to just 0 seconds, 0 hours, and 0 minutes. Because that's happening on server and it can't do everything that we can do on the client. a bit lost where that is happening. But if you look at the rendered page source, you see that. So just do view page source, and you look for page rendered. So, oh yeah, it states just now. Oh yeah, that's where it was, just line 35. So if we're not mounted yet, which we're doing in state, so we're keeping state on line 14, that we have mounted this component. And that set is mounted is called in the first render or the first call to use effect. So that's when we know that we have rendered. So then we know that we can update the timer. And otherwise, just now is fine for this component. Sorry, I was a bit lost on what we wrote there, but I hope everyone is following along. And again, let us know in chat if you're lost at any point, and we'll take a step back. Awesome. Right, we can continue to the board.
All right, so we've created this component, and now we're going to get in a bit to pages and routes.
Yeah, so if you can follow me again. So what the team of @Vercel did is create a really nice system that makes sure that you don't need to write your own router or anything. And it works, well, in my opinion, it's like super easy. It feels like back in the day when I was creating just HTML websites. You just create a folder with an index.html and you have a route. You see here in the yellow sidebar that's on the board, this is the /app folder, and app has a page.tsx, a layout, an error, a loading, and a head. And we'll get into the details of what all these files do later on. But you also see that there's /bracket article ID closing bracket, which has its own loading, error, page, and layout.tsx. And then underneath that, we have news, archive, about, jobs, and contact, which all have their page.tsx. And page.tsx, you can kind of think of it as just your index.html if you have an HTML website. So let's say we're building a news website, then this news button would just go to the news/page.tsx. So we have a page.tsx, which is in this case our home page for the root page.tsx, and it has a layout. The layout, you can think of it as the layout for your whole page. So this would hold our menu, our sidebar, our logo, maybe the website footer. They would live in layout because it's shared between routes. And if you look in the article ID folder, it also has its own layout.tsx. So everything that's in a subfolder gets mounted inside of the layout of its parent. So does that make sense? Everything that's in a subfolder gets rendered in the layout.tsx of its parent, but you can indefinitely nest. So you can have 10 layers deep, a route of 10 layers deep, and they all have their own route. So let's say on our articles page, we'll always have a sidebar, which doesn't exist on the home page for our news website. Then that sidebar would live in layout.tsx in the /article ID folder. Now, the actual page content would live in page.tsx. Now, there's also error.tsx, and well, if there's any error thrown inside of the page or layout.tsx, then you will be routed, or the Next.js will be using error.tsx, and you can display the error message that's suitable there. And what's really cool is they also implemented loading.tsx. And well, let's say you have a loading.tsx and you're you're clicking a link on the client. Then of course we don't want to re-render the whole page, but we need to wait a bit for a spinner to be done. So let's say we were on newswebsite.com, but we're navigating now to newswebsite.com/foobar. Then we will see this amazing spinner. And when that's done, we'll notice, oh, there is no article with the ID foobar. So that's our error.tsx that now gets loaded. So we will correct the URL, and then we will go to newswebsite.com/real article ID. And we'll get an amazing article which an author wrote, and it has a title. So what's cool now is that real article ID is something you might want to use to send to your backend, right? To talk to your API and fetch the real article ID's information. So because you have created a folder with square brackets, which holds the text article ID is now a variable inside of your component. So this is the article ID /page.tsx. Your page now will receive params, and that's just an object, because you can have nested routes. So you can have a variable in the folder name which holds a folder that's a variable in the folder name, which holds a folder that holds a variable in the folder name, which holds a folder that holds a variable in the folder name. Okay, got it. So, and in that case, you'll have article ID, and let's say the articles will have comments, then you can maybe deep link to that comment, and you can add here comment ID. That's also going to be in the folder name. But we don't have that, so let's stick to this. And then let's say you have a function called fetch article that accepts an article ID, and you can just call that. And this is something that might be new. So if you pay close attention on line 2, you'll see that I'm making an async component, basically. So I'm saying export default async function. And I'm using await inside this component. And this is something you can do because this is used being rendered on the server. So you can just use async await inside of your components. And then when the await is done, article data will be defined, and I can just render my my component or my page and call article data.title, or whatever the structure of your data object will be. Now, what's nice is that in here again you can create an error.tsx or a page tsx and a layout. So let's say this article would have some sub-navigation. I would put that in layout.tsx, and layout would be rendered inside of the layout of the root layout. Does that still make sense? I hope everyone can follow along. I know this is a lot to grasp, but it will make sense as soon as you start building with this. And of course, the documentation is there on the website of Next.js, so you can follow along there. But I hope this it was a bit followable. That's not a word, but I'm just making it up. So we're going to actually create something now. This is a workshop, right? So we are going to, we have already created a page that shows that there's 3 boards that we can list. So if you can go to the localhost, Will, you see that lists all your 3 boards here. And what we want to do is actually just create list items there. And we've already, of course, in our patch file, prepared some things for you. So what you can do is you can open your page.tsx.
Nog steeds bezig. Oké, toegevoegd aan herinneringen.
And in here, you'll see, if you scroll down a bit, that list that we want to fill. So there's now an empty list with an empty list item, and we want to iterate over all the boards that we have. And we need to do this so that we can display the capabilities of the subroutes. So what we'll do is we'll map over everything that's in boards. So boards is just an array. So we'll use array boards.map.
And
this
Mettin,
code is not in the board.
Would you like me to let you share your screen? And maybe that's easier, or?
Yeah, that might be. Yeah, that might make sense. Yeah.
Okay.
So I will share my screen. Okay, so let me go into making this a little bit bigger. So I've already done it here. Oh, I haven't. So what you can do is just go over boards, boards.map, and you'll have board. And you can just return
Mettin,
a list.
I don't think we're seeing your screen yet.
You're not seeing my screen. You're seeing nothing, or?
Just you at the moment.
Which is also nice. Can I get some AV help from the team? I don't know how to share my screen. I am sharing it. So, Nikki, are you there?
Mettin, I sent you a link in the chat. If you access through that one, I think you should see a present option.
But then I should disconnect this tab? Or? I'm not accepted. Oh, I see that the AV team is on their way in solving this issue. So I hope everyone has a moment while we figure this out. But I can just tell you what to do. Because you should open your page.tsx that's in app. So app.page. You see it now.
There we go.
Nice. This is. Oh, I'm so unfamiliar with presentation mode. I'm a bit lost now. This is what I needed. All right, you still can see my screen, right?
Yes. Yep.
I'm there. Okay. So inside the list, you can map over boards. Boards is defined here, and like showcased in the example of the news website, I'm using async and await, and fetch boards just abstracted away some data that we want to grab. And in here, I can just say board dot, well, I don't know the exact structure, so I can go into fetch boards, and I can see here that fetch boards returns an array of board objects, and board has baseboard. Get all items returns here widget item. Okay. Sorry, I was a bit lost, but I think it's just board not title. Now I need to run this. So I will go in my terminal in another screen So I'm keeping it private. Okay, yarn start, and I'm starting the server, and then I will go to localhost 3000. I think I've started the wrong server. Sorry for this. Bear with me. This is my first time giving a workshop. I'm doing my best.
And just for anybody who's joined in the meantime, what we're doing is Mettin is demonstrating how we can update the homepage so that it lists Miro boards in this account.
Yeah. All right. So now you see here that this is working. I have added this text. I'm actually cheating because I'm sharing. I have it all prepared here already. So this is the code. So I'm looking if there's any boards, and if there are, I'm mapping over them, and then returning a list item that holds a link to /boards/board ID. And as the content of that link, I'm using board.name. So now I get a list of all the Miro boards that my account has access to. And what we're going to do now is create that boards/board ID page. So you see here, I have a folder called boards, and inside there is a square bracket board folder. Now square bracket board has its own layout.tsx, it has its own loading .tsx, and its own page.tsx. So you see now that if I click this, it's going to be loading the board info. So that's this text from loading.tsx, and it has layout, which has the board name and a back button. So that's JSWORLD conf dev, that's the name of the Miro board, and a back button. And now all the content is rendered to page.tsx. So that's /boards/board in square brackets, and then page.tsx. In there, I'm just fetching all the items in this board. To do that, first I need to get some information of the Miro board itself. And I'm using board just to have a link here so that I can go to miro.com. I'm fetching all the items with a function called fetch board items. Now this is not something you have in your snippet, in your patch file. So I will show this code. It's quite simple. The thing is that we always have to check before we do any call to any API if we're authorized. You have to do this again and again, so that's why I have abstracted this into its own file. So I have fetch board item, fetch board items, and fetch boards. In fetch board items, I'm calling fetch board, and I need to call board.getAllItems. So board.getAllItems is a function that's available in the Miro node client that we have, that my team made. Thank you, Joseph, my team member, did a great job. And it's just an async function that returns all the items on the board. And I can use this for await const item of all raw items and kind of convert that, because it returns a generator function. So that's why I need to go over them like this to basically generate all the items into a normal array. And then I will return items. Or if it doesn't work out, I'm throwing an error that this board is not found, and that will cause the error.tsx to be loaded. Now you'll see here that my board folder doesn't hold a error.tsx. So that will mean that the next highest up error.tsx will be used, which in this case will be the root error.tsx. So it always makes sense to have at least a root error.tsx so you have control over the error page. Now, if you have that working, you can just loop over all the items in your board and again make a list that displays all the items that are on your board or your news website or whatever it is that your application is that you're making, not for production. And if there's nothing, well, of course, display a message that there's nothing on this board. So just to show you what we're doing, I'm going to go to miro.com and see, hey, this is actually our presentation board. So I am listing all the items on our presentation board. So let's get back to that. And then, of course, it's a big board with a lot of information. So it takes a while. See, it's a really long page, but like every little item that we have on this board, every text. Oh, here, you see here, this was the news website example that we showed. Well, this content is just available through the Miro API. Newswebsite.com, our lorem ipsum, it's all listed in here. So what I'll do is just this loop is not that important to write yourself. The most important part is getting the routing right. So I'll also pop this in the chat. If I can find the right window. Yeah. All right. And that you can just use to map over all the items. All right. So, and again, this whole page is now rendered on the server because we have used, we didn't say on the top here that this is use client. So it will be rendered on the server. So if that means that our API calls will also be done on the server, unless of course you're navigating on the client. What's nice about this is that all API calls that are done with async await or basically using fetch. So I'm using fetch board, which uses the Miro client, but underwater, that's just using the fetch API. We're just abstracting stuff away. And every time you're using the fetch API, Next.js catches that and sees that you're doing the same call maybe in 2 or 3 or 5 different places. Doesn't matter. Next.js will catch that and dedupe them. So it will cache the result, and just if you're calling the same thing with the same parameters twice, it will return that response for you. And there is some control. You can pass some parameters that you also want, always want to refetch. But that's why it doesn't matter that you're calling the same thing, let's say 5 times in one render in 7 different components. Next.js will make sure that it's optimized and fast. All right, let's have a look at the board. So I have actually been skipping looking at the board. I've been going too hard. So we already did step 1, updating the home page and listing all the boards, and we've made them clickable. So now we're going to do the next step, which is making every item clickable, so we can view the metadata of that item. So we're going deeper into routing. So what we want to do is create a item ID folder, of course, wrap item ID with square brackets. And in there, you can create the loading.tsx and say we're loading the item info. It's not necessary, but it's just to showcase the capabilities of the loading.tsx. So if I click this now, you saw just for a little bit that it was loading the item info. And then you can create a page.tsx in that folder. And what's nice here now is that I showed you before that params will be filled with every folder name in square brackets, basically. So we have app.boards. So you see here my URL that I'm at boards / and then some ID, which is going to be the board variable. And then this is the item ID on the board. So this number, and that's going to be item ID. So params.board corresponds to this, and params.item ID corresponds to this. And that's because we've used the square bracket notation for the folder names. And the component that you're returning just receives the params, which hold those URL segments. Now, what I've done here is just, this is the most important part. I'm just calling json.stringify to show all the information of this board. So is everyone still following along? I hope it's not going a bit too fast. So let's reiterate over what we've done. We have made a list in page.tsx where we list all the items that are returned from the Miro API and added links around that so that we can go see more information about that specific board. So we're actually using the Miro client to list all the items on our presentation board that we're using for this workshop here today. So let's say, let's click another one. I'm going to go to a frame with the ID of 3, 4, 5, etc. So you see all the information of this frame. So you see where it is when it's modified, but I want to see, well, this is everything that you can want to do with that board, what to know. And you can click a link and view all the information of that board. And if I inspect the source of this page, let's look for base path. So you see this is actually rendered on the server completely. This is of course a JSON.stringify that's in the pre. That's even easier to read maybe. So this is all readable. So our base path is here listed as api.miro.com. So that's the same information. This is super powerful. I didn't have to do anything special. All I needed to do is just create a page.tsx, and Next.js took care of everything for me to make sure this is server-side rendered. Everyone still there?
It looks good.
Yeah. All right. So we were basically reiterating. We created a page at CSX and then created a /board folder with square brackets in boards that holds a layout and a page at CSX. Now, layout will contain maybe my sub-navigation if I'm creating a news website to navigate between comments or whatever. And your page will be the actual news article that you are trying to reference. And once again, everything is going to be rendered on the server. Then let's go back to our Miro board and see what the next steps were. So we've made every item clickable and then list all the metadata. We've done that, all right. So what you can do now is add a loading.tsx component inside the app folder. So you can go to app and create a loading.tsx. What I've done, of course, you wouldn't name your loaders normally, but I've just named all my loader files. So you see that also in here with my loading. I've got it loading board info and loading item info, so that when it's loading, you see now I'm doing the main loader. Now main loader is done, but then I'm loading the board info. And when it's done loading and I will click an item on the board info, you'll see that it's using the last loader, which is loading item info, which should be pretty fast. So loading item info, ooh, that was really fast because it's a lot smaller API call. All right. So has everyone had a chance to create a loading.tsx? If you want to use the Miro styling, you can just look at these class names. Our CSS library called Mirotone is included in this code example that we've prepared for you. So it will look like it's a proper Miro app, and just use button primary, and button loading to have a loader for you with that cool animation. So now you can go to your page and just reload, and you should see a spinner for a brief second. I hope everyone got that. Now let's do the same. No, not the same. Let's create an error.tsx. I will just copy this into the chat. And now if you go to a non-existing page, for example, that's wrong. Oh wait, that's if I go to a non-existing board, then you see that this gets rendered. Reset error boundary doesn't do anything. This is actually just the error component that's in the Next.js documentation. So nothing fancy on our hand here. But now you can render any error page that you want. See that it's working. So if I go back to the board that was existing, just fix the URL, then everything is working fine again. And that's it for routing. So once again, you can just create folders with these square brackets. And there's even a fancier way of fetch using URL segments. So if you name a folder with ... item ID inside square brackets, then that's a catch-all file. So if it's going to have 5 slashes after it with different URL segments, URL variables, then that will be catched by this notation. And then your params will look a little bit different. You can find out how that works in the Next.js documentation. All right. If there's any questions, let me know. And otherwise, Will, you can take over again.
Thanks, Mettin. Yes, so just in case anybody joined perhaps part of the way through, Mettin was just wrapping up demonstrating some of the capabilities of the routes and the nested page layouts. But before that, we went over a bit about server components and their use cases and why they're valuable. We talked about using both client components and server components to complement each other and kind of the different use cases around that. But now we're getting towards the end, and we just kind of want to take a moment to highlight really like the power of each thing that we've shown today and that Mettin has shown in his latest little demo here. Essentially, React server components are still evolving, as we said, but the developer experience, especially when using them in like Next.js, is really seamless, and it really allows you to create lightweight, better performing applications, using some of the tricks we just talked about. So just share my screen real quick to kind of drive home one last point, which is that these are a beta capability. So we definitely recommend checking out like more in depth some of the documentation that Mettin and I pointed out earlier. So Vercel and Next.js specifically have a really comprehensive suite of beta docs for anything you might do in the app directory. And for the most part, we've been working primarily in the app directory in this boilerplate application we've created. But specifically, the 2 pages that you might want to check out for more information would be anything around the server components, obviously, and then as well the layouts section in Next.js. So that will cover some of the things that Mettin was just talking about in terms of the routing and everything. And in addition to that, we've been using Miro for a lot of the complementary capabilities for this app. So, if you're interested in using Miro more, you can check out the NPM package that we have for Create Miro App. And so in the very beginning, when we ran that yarn Create Miro App statement, that was leveraging this package. So it's a really easy way to create a Miro app right from the command line. We've also got our developer documentation where you can check out some other cool use cases for things that you could do with Miro. We have a REST API, a web SDK, and some other ways to embed boards onto any site or app. So there's a lot of really cool things you could do aside from, we were showing how you could organize Miro board information on like a page, but you could also do things to manipulate Miro board items and create interactive types of applications. So if you're interested in that, you can also join our Discord server where you can bounce ideas off of people. You can talk with us and more. But I guess, that's mostly everything we've covered so far. And these would be kind of the resources to take you one step further.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for following along. I hope everyone learned something. Like I mentioned, this was my first time being the instructor for a workshop. So I hope everyone had a good time and learned something. I had a lot of fun preparing this with Will, so I hope you can see some hours went into it. And yeah, that's it for this workshop here. So thanks a lot for joining, and hope to see everyone on Wednesday when I will be at the conference. You won't be, Will?
I won't be, but I'll be there in spirit.
Yeah. Okay, that's good enough. Good enough.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks
again,
everyone.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye.